Greetings, my humble viewers, to another exciting episode of Stableside Discussions, Disputes, and Debates. I am once again your humble host, Misfortune, and I am back from vacation, and I'm feeling refreshed, revitalized, restocked, and reloaded. If you guys have never been on vacation before, go on vacation. It is freaking amazing. In fact, on mine, I got a lot of work done on my story, The Price of Loyalty. Yes, shameless advertising, I know. We have gone corporate, we sold out, and we need to fulfill advertisement quotas, otherwise we get lash-ins and layoffs. We here at SD3 don't want to let our poor workers starve and live in a box, of course. So be sure to support your SD3 crew, even though it only consists of me and our now new techie Hingard. Say hello, Hingard.
Hello.
Yes, that's Hingard. He's a cool guy, and he's a good scapegoat if something should go wrong. But anyway, support your SD3 crew by putting up with our dumb advertisements for all of less than a minute, and we will reward your aching ears with some juicy morsels from our panelists. That aside, today's advertisement is of the freaking vacation variety. They're extremely amazing, folks. They're not just for relaxing and relieving all that pent-up stress from this horrible thing we call life. It's also fantastic for helping you to get a fresh perspective on the arts. In my case, my story, which I haven't published a new chapter in about 6 months now because I've been too busy bringing all you good people reviews in a silly talk show. But I just finished my third and fourth chapters, the third one to be published very soon, hopefully today, tomorrow, or a little later, depending on how lazy my proofreaders are. Hint, hint.
Oh, shut up.
Anywho, this vacation, within a week, I didn't get a huge amount of quantity done, but I feel my quality's better than ever. My vacation's been so helpful, in fact, I can't stop telling all my friends and family to go on one. And especially for all you artists, writers, musicians, and other content creators out there that are frustrated with life getting in the way of your untapped talent. So go on vacation, try to do it for a week, and unlock your inner ability to write, draw, or whatever the heck it is you do. SD3 completely recommends it. Right, so there's our ad for the day and my usual introduction with all of the rambling. Let's get to the good stuff I'm sure you're all here for. Before we begin, I do see we got a few new folks joining us for the first time here on SD3. So that said, we're going to commence with a customary explanation of what our silly talk show is actually about. SD3, otherwise known as Stableside Discussions, Disputes, and Debates, is a show that originated from a critique group over on the MLP fanfic site, FanFiction.net, called the Equestrian Critics Society. We wanted to make this show to help pass the time for our patient users awaiting their reviews, and hopefully make it entertaining by inviting special guests, such as the three I have with us today, and one of my critics. And we try to include a guest from our user base to spiff up the conversation, but unfortunately we do not have one joining us today. So what do we talk about? All things pony and brony. If there's something interesting to talk about, such as groups, our beloved show itself, overlooked content creators, and hopefully some other fun things to sink our teeth into, such as discussing Equestrian girls and all the controversy surrounding it. We all talk over one another to talk about our opinions on things, and it gets pretty crazy around here, but that's what makes our show fun. In fact, our last few episodes were all about the Music Equestria Tour and the Rainbow and Rooted album. And we brought all kinds of cool guests from the brony music world, such as Glaze, or the Wooden Toaster, Speedcore Dave, Lavender Harmony, Pony Don DeVore, and many others. Those episodes are wild and wacky, but they're fun to do. So, now that you hopefully have some idea what our show actually is, let's quit mucking around and get into the good stuff. Today's episode, we're going to be trying something brand new. Since this talk show originates from our critique group, part of our job is helping authors with our feedback. I figured I should do something to give something back to all of our faithful users, apart from the reviews and this talk show. So today we're kicking off our first workshop episode. And of course, we're going to be focusing on writing first. It's all experimental, and we're going to be trying different things to make it work. We're going to be trying different genres, thingamajigs like music and artistry and so on. We're basically going to be able to cover tips on all those different mediums. So if you have any suggestions or feedback, let us know on our YouTube channel, where all these episodes go post-stream. Right, so let's get the nitty-gritty details here. So what we're going to be covering in this particular workshop is pacing. How this will go down is I may spend a minute or so talking about specific tips or explanations, then let my panelists have their own say in the matter. They can back me up with branching comments or conversations of their own, or disprove me with their own thoughts on the matter. Hopefully it should equal an interesting but helpful show. Now, without further ado, allow me to introduce our panelists joining us on our very first workshop episode. Joining us today, we have my good friends and returning guests, Cole and Gardez.
Hello, hello.
And the A&Y Pony.
Who?
New to the show, we have Treasure in the West and Cult of the West author Divebomb.
He lost connection.
Yeah, we kind of lost him.
Oh, no.
But I could pretend to be him.
No, you can't.
Hello guys, I'm Divebomb. I am here because, what do I do? Give me a hint, misfortune. I am...
Oh, alright, shush, Divebomb. We'll try to get him back, folks, and we'll let him say his piece.
Oh.
But yeah, Divebomb. And we also have our newest critic from the Equestrian Critic Society, Perception Filter.
What's up, guys?
Alright, and unfortunately, like I said, we do not have our community guest joining us today, as much as we'd like to have community guests joining our show. So, everybody, welcome to the show. Before we begin, would you like to tell our audience a bit about yourselves, what you do, what you write, what kind of other nonsense you do, and so on? Gardez, would you like to kick it off?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, first, for having me back here. It's always a pleasure to come and talk to the Equestrian Critic Society. A little bit about myself. I am a FanFiction author. I've been writing in this fandom since about July of 2011, so 2 years or so ago. Most of my stories are comedies, but I'll write in pretty much any genre. I've done some romance-type stuff. I've done some adventures. Done some dark tragedy-type stuff. Pretty much anything that I think is going to be interesting. Outside of the fandom, I'm one of the many military bronies. Done quite a bit of writing while I was deployed.
Hold on a second, Gardez.
Hi, Bob.
Well, that was interesting. Okay. To recap some of that, in case you didn't hear it, I write a bunch of stuff, and I'm in the military. That's pretty much the short and sweet of it. Over.
Cool beans. So that is Gardez. And why? What do you have to tell us about yourself? What do you do?
I am a German brony who became kind of active about, nearly a year ago. I believe it was in September last year, shortly before Season 3 started. And I originally intended to be a dramatic reader. This idea kind of went down the window for half a year, and I kind of did episode reviews, and later on started a podcast show, the Crepuscular Bronies Discuss, where we ramble on for hours about not really much. And by now I have far too many sub-segments on my goddamn channel that I have any idea. But yeah, the A&Y Pony on YouTube. And I finally managed to even start fiction reading. Heyo!
Heyo. Alright, Divebomb, are you back with us?
Yeah, sorry, some internet difficulties.
He lives.
Hopefully it won't happen again.
Okay, would you like to say hello to our audience and tell us a bit about yourself, Divebomb? Like, what you write, what you do, how long you've been in the fandom, other interesting info like that?
I pretty much came into the fandom about a year and a half or something like that ago. Pretty much the same way everyone else did. Well, a lot of other people did, by finding out what the heck My Little Dashie was. And then just kind of going along links, looking at YouTube videos, things like that. And I pretty much read a couple of the fics on FFN, and kind of said to myself, well, let's try that. Let's try doing that just for some kicks. And essentially, it just kind of went from there. Essentially, what I write nowadays is shipping, adventure, action, those kinds of things. And that, and I do vectors on DeviantArt, draw a few things. Like all my covers are drawn by me. And every now and then I'll draw something for someone else, something like that. But that's kind of what I do in the fandom, I guess.
Alright, that's cool. We don't have enough adventure authors out there like yourself, especially doing westerns that are all fun, action-y adventure stuff. So it's nice to get some variety out there, Divebomb. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Alright, so last but not least, Perception Filter. What do you have to tell us and our audience about yourself?
Oh, not much. I could say I got into the show a few years back when my friend kept pestering me about it and wouldn't let it drop until I watched the first few episodes, and I did. I didn't really like the show.
I got past those first few episodes, though, and I got hooked. It got me. And, yeah, I found the site a few years ago. I got mainly into the fanfiction part of it from a Cupcakes, I believe it was, on YouTube. There was a Cupcakes reading. And as horrible as it was, it got me into it enough to help me start blossoming as a writer. I mean, I never really wrote much before this, but yeah, I don't have much else
do you
to
write
say.
a lot?
What?
You say you're a writer, so do you write a lot?
Not really. I'm lazy.
Well, that makes like 5 writers in this chat, I think.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I'd like to give Hingard one brief moment of glory to let him say his piece before we never, ever hear from him again on the show. So, Hingard, would you like to tell us just a bit about yourself and I guess maybe why you came into this fold as our techie?
Well, I'm a bit new to the writing scene. I've only been writing for maybe about a year. I came on as a techie mainly because I wanted to help out the show and I wanted to just help out with the group in general since I haven't really been able to do much and I'm not that great of a reviewer. So I figured I could help out this way.
Yeah, that's Hingard, ladies and gentlemen. You may never hear from him again.
Thank God.
Alrighty. By the way, NY, I think this makes us even for featuring each other on our respective shows.
What?
Double check the count. Wouldn't you say?
Sure.
By the way,
yeah,
folks, AMY Pony's show, Crepuscular Bronies Discuss, is loads of fun. You should check it out sometime. Brought me on a couple times. Now I figured I'd bring him on a couple times so we can embarrass each other on our respective shows. It's always fun stuff. So, let's bring this back to SD3 and our topic today. As I said, this episode is all about the fine art of pacing. Something that's super duper important in anything that has a good story, whether it be TV or theater or fan fictions or any kind of writing in general. Heck, it can even come into a roller coaster ride, which I will bring up the analogy again a little later. But to kick this off, panelists, as I said, you're welcome to chime in at any time. So, let's start this off properly. What is pacing? Pacing is perhaps one of the most important but often mishandled aspects of storytelling and writing. It's also one of the hardest to master. What pacing is the speed-ups and the slowdowns that gives the story its variety and even entertainment value. It's when the story speeds up during an action scene, a chase scene, or something exciting, energetic happening with the characters in the world. Basically a real thrill ride. Oh, Divebomb, a little bit of feedback going on here.
Oh, is that me? Hold on a second. I'll turn off my air conditioner and just boil in the heat.
Yes, that's standard operating procedure here on SD3, folks. Don't you worry none. As I was saying, pacing is basically the speed-ups with bigger action scenes, and you have entertaining things happening with the characters that are going on in the story. Basically, the thrill ride of the story. But it's also the slowdowns, the breathers, the moments where we spend time getting to know our characters, our world, and absorb everything that just happened during the speed-up sections. It's also what wakes up the audience just as things might start to get dull by either moving at a breakneck or even a simple brisk pace to heighten intensity, a la your Dark Knight or Dark Knight Rises. Those movies are awesome, by the way. Any good story with good pacing has basically both of these types of pacing, where it makes the story unpredictable, interesting, full of variety, and makes the story feel like a real roller coaster ride. Stories with bad pacing, on the other hand, they keep things at a breakneck speed for far too long and then fatigue the audience, or they slow things down for far too long and then bore the audience and ultimately lose their interest. But that is the basic explanation of pacing. So before I roll on, panelists, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, that sounds good.
Sounds about right.
I guess so.
Okie dokie. This is the part where I have to start improvising. So all you writers out there, how do you basically identify and write these different types of pacing? How I kind of see it is there's 3 main types of pacing. You got your fast, your medium, and your slow. fast pacing is basically when you have lots of crazy things happening. You have basically the characters doing things. We are focusing very little on detail. We don't have a lot of focus on what the environment looks like. We don't have any idea what any of the side characters looks like. And we're far less focused on world building and details and things like that. We're more focused on the action, the things that are happening, the moving the story forward at a brisk pace. Then you got slow pacing. This is where you want to be. This is where you'd be seeing basically where characters are building their relationships. They are explaining bits about themselves. We're getting to learn a bit about them and the world. This is where we're really spending time getting to know our world and also sponge up what happened during the fast-paced sections. Because obviously, those things go by really quick, and if we spend far too long going at a fast pace, we're not going to be able to register what just happened. So this is why we have our slow pacing, to really let us breathe and basically piece together what just happened and let the characters piece together what happened, so on and so forth. Then you got kind of your butter zone in between. As I said, is basically kind of like your Dark Knight, where things, you have some details going on, you have some bits of information coming in here and there. Not as much as you get in the slow pacing, but a lot more than you see in the fast pacing. But the medium pacing is when you see a lot of, it's kind of your tense moments, when your characters are like having an interrogation scene, or we're having something like that, where we're just moving at a brisk pace and characters are being followed, or things like that. Nothing moving too fast nor too slow. Like I said, your butter zone. So, how do you kind of write these types of pacing? Actually, first of all, guys, do you have anything you want to comment on these types of pacing? Maybe have your own ideas on different kinds of pacing, or something I might have missed saying.
I would say pacing is not necessarily only the speed of the pacing is not necessarily only about giving more or less details, but also very strongly about creating certain moods. Like you explained earlier, that for example, in action scenes, the pacing usually gets a little bit quicker to suggest the reader the quickness of things happening, and a certain form of hectic. Yeah, and so I guess, sure, you can put more details on a moment, but for example, you could also use quick pacing, but in this quick pacing kind of describing how a relationship between people changed over a long time, which is still kind of a way to characterize stuff.
Yeah, that's a pretty good... I actually like the way you describe it, breaking it into essentially three broad sections, the fast, medium, and slow. What I would say is that, kind of in that same vein, what you're describing is going to, a lot of times, influence the type of language and writing that you'll use. So, to use the fast example that you're talking about, say you're trying to write an action scene, something that's kind of difficult to do for a lot of people. You're going to want to use short paragraphs, short sentences, simple sentences that use the simple past tense, if that's the tense you're writing in. You're not going to want to use long paragraphs, long sentences with lots of clauses and commas, things that slow down the reading. You want the reader to really just fly through your scene as quickly as possible. And then for something slower, where you're just describing, like, say, the scenery or the situation that your characters are in, you can use those longer paragraphs, those longer sentences. You know, spend some time talking about the forest that they're in, or the mountains around them, or the house that they're in. So the situation, the scene, what you're trying to describe is going to influence, the type of pacing.
Divebomb, Perception, do you have anything you want to add?
Not really. You guys covered it pretty broadly.
I think I have a few things. Well, first off, what you guys covered, you definitely covered a lot there. There are, of course, things that can definitely take you off the path of the pacing you're trying to go for. Like, if you're trying to go for slow pacing, there are a few things that I've noticed a couple people that try and use to lengthen a paragraph to try and get that slower pacing. like one of them's redundancies. It's like for an example, it's something like it was a cold night. It was a cold night. Sentence ends. There was a chill in the air. You're just talking about something like that for 3 sentences when you don't need to. And redundancies are usually used by a writer for things like to, again, fill in the paragraph, or if the writer doesn't necessarily trust the intelligence of the reader or his own writing. A good thing to avoid things like that is just reading your paragraphs and your sentences and paragraphs out loud, and don't just read it like the teacher just asked you to read aloud a paragraph in English class, or actually listen to yourself read it and see how the sentences flow with each other, and see if that's the speed that you want the reader to read it at. Another thing to help try and convey the pacing that you're going for is, one thing I like to do is think of it like a movie. Like, try and think of the scenes as if you were watching it, if you were watching a film version of your story. Like, whereas if you're going for something fast, like say a fight scene or something, you want to take that camera and zoom it right into the character that you're writing about. You want to make the reader kind of know the direct things that are going on in his head, and let the reader taste the blood on his lips, let him feel the sweat. But at the same time, don't describe a beautiful statue in the background while this is going on.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to, during pacing, we don't want to shift our focus to things that are unimportant, because obviously there's time and a place for the important details, right?
Of course, yeah.
Alright, so next thing I want to talk about is how to write these different types of pacing. And I had to go and fetch a really handy book to get my example for this. It's called The No Experience Necessary Writer's Course, a unique stress-free approach for anyone who has ever wanted to write, by Scott Edelstein. You guys should check it out because this is a really useful book. But one of the passages here talks about pacing. It basically uses this example here of a scene happening. So it has this exact same scene but written 3 different ways. And I'd like to read them out so you guys got an idea of what the different kinds of pacing styles is. So, like I said, this is all the exact same scene but just written 3 different ways. This is an example of the really fast-paced scene of this. Frank took the bus downtown and got the money from his safe deposit box. Really vague, and a lot just kind of happened in that one sentence, right? So, that's an example of fast pacing, and that's when you're just doing an action scene and you're wanting to have just move on from unimportant details and just move in with the plot if there's nothing important going on. But it's obviously not that interesting to some degree, and obviously we're kind of left vague, no details. Like if you were to see a picture of this, for example, you'd see just this guy Frank, you'd see a bus, and you'd see a bank. Really, really vague blurs of them, right? So, the second example, this is kind of the medium pacing. Like I said, same scene, but just written differently. Frank waited 40 minutes before the bus finally arrived. It took another 20 minutes for it to lumber downtown, where the bank containing his safe deposit box was. At first, the box wouldn't open, and Frank feared that the lock had been changed. Then the key turned. And Frank carefully took all the money from the box and hid it in his money belt. So, we definitely learned a few more things in this particular meeting pacing. We learned that he's perhaps a little paranoid. We've learned that the bus is slow, how long he waited for that bus. We got a lot more details, right? So we have a much better idea of what's going on, and we have a much better idea of the scene that's happening. And then, final example, this is the slow pacing, and forgive me, this is a little long. Frank chain-smoked cigarettes until his bus came. He had to wait 40 minutes, and with each minute he became more anxious. When the bus finally arrived, it was packed with sweating secretaries and business people on their way to work. Frank had to stand all the way downtown, and because of the rush hour traffic normally brief trip took, 20 minutes. When the bus finally reached a stop, Frank got off and walked slowly to his bank, doing his best to avoid attracting attention. One of the female tellers eyed him up and down as he entered, and he couldn't tell whether she found him attractive or suspicious, perhaps both. He made his way to the safe deposit boxes and fished in his pocket for the key. On his first 3 tries, the lock would not turn, and for a frightening moment, Frank thought they know all about the deal, and they changed the lock on me. Then the key turned, and the box slid out. As calmly as he could, Frank took the $6,000 bills from the box and slid them inside his money belt. So that's an example of slow pacing, but we have a lot more details, and we actually have a lot more complexity to our character Frank than we originally thought from our fast version, right?
Indeed.
But yeah, that's why you want to have the slow paces there, so people can have a really good idea of what all's going on, what's going through the characters' heads, what other things are happening in this environment that this character is in. Because, those are kind of important. But while the final example is a little bit intense, it does slow down the action a bit, and the scene may not even be very important in the long run, but as we've kind of seen in this example, they made it important. So that's kind of why you want to have those different types of writing. Anything you guys are going to say?
Yeah, not really. No, I guess not.
It pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, that's it. Nothing more you can say.
Like I said, I'm trying to improvise this. I whipped the script up in the last 2 hours, so forgive me if this is all.
Well, at this rate, you might as well just do the whole show.
All right, but now let's get to some interesting stuff. Now that you guys basically know what the different types of pacing are and hopefully how to write them, let's talk about good and bad pacing, okay? And I think one of the reasons I brought ANY on this show is because I think he can help talk about an example of something with bad pacing. And that, I believe, is the final episode of Season 3 for My Little Pony.
Probably.
That's Mystery Cure.
Yes.
All right.
I don't know, should I start, or...
Oh, feel free. What do you have to say about Magical Mystery Cure and its examples of bad pacing?
Well, I guess, first of all, it actually comes a little bit to, it's a little bit a matter of taste. For example, if anybody of you have seen Digibrony is like, oh my god, it's the best pacing in the world! And, well, but even so, you can say, well, it is a matter of taste. 99% of everybody else says, oh, the pacing is a little bit quick, so, yeah, so besides this fact, you can probably say that generally good or better pacing is probably one that speaks to more people at once, so that more people can relate to a story in a certain level of pacing. And the thing about Magical Mystery Cure is, and I just get most people have seen it, so it is an example probably everybody in the show should be familiar with, that they really try to cram an awful lot of information in this story, and they used a few tricks that, well, are a little bit difficult to transfer into writing, but for example, with all the musical numbers they used, they went there and because telling the story in the usual way, like having character A and B meet, talk, and go through all ways of exposition and discovering things one by one, they turned pretty much more than 50% of this episode into musical numbers. So they had an easier time to get all the story told, because it's probably, I mean, it's a lot of speculation why they did it, but they crammed information and story in this 120-minute episode, which could probably have been lasted for, I don't know, 2 to 3 episodes. And the thing is, the pacing was even... They had this whole part about the Cutie Mark switch and about the spell and everything, and I believe this only lasted about 10 minutes, and this was all really, really quick. And I know the funny thing is that when it first came out, Digi was like, whoa, greatest pacing in the world. Somebody else, Jacob Dickens, went over to him and was like, dude, it was far too quick. And Digi was like, dude, watch it another time. Maybe then you like it. And Jacob hated it first, but after rewatching it, he was able to grasp it and he started enjoying this episode. But this is showing that a too quick pacing can overwhelm a viewer or I guess even a reader, because if too much stuff is happening, too much information is crammed in a too short period of time or too short writing size level, whatever.
And would it be safe to say that Magical Mystery Cure was kind of like a car going at 100 miles an hour and braking really hard a couple of times as it was going this, and then it only lasts maybe 5 minutes, and you come out not knowing what the heck just happened?
In a way.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy you got there.
Yeah.
So that'd be safe to say that's what you think it would be anyway?
I'm not sure where you mean the stop moments where, because this car raced until the coronation and then it kind of slowed down radically, but
well, I figured the brakes got applied when it was
yeah, but it was
Twilight being depressed and then Twilight having her little revelation.
Good point. Oh yeah, now I see what you mean. Right. There were this few scenes where it really went down to yeah, I kind of forgot about the scene, but yeah, good point actually. That yeah, the opening for example, the opening song was rather slow. There was nothing happening for 2 minutes except the song and Twilight telling randomness.
Good morning, USA.
Exactly. This was such a great mixture. But yeah, nothing happening until the intro. Then there was a Cutie Mark song, and there was information. Then we got Depressed Twilight, which was very slow again, and then we have the whole curing thing, which was extremely quick again. And then in the afterlife, it was rather slow again. Yeah, okay. Yes, this analogy really works pretty well. See it now. I guess this is also something, this extreme mixture makes it probably for a lot of people even harder to follow when there is so much of a change. Even so, I guess in a story, this could maybe work better. I'm not sure. I haven't read many stories which switch a lot between very quick and very slow pacing. I don't know if any of you guys have experience with this?
Well, I could definitely tell you we've read some fictions that sometimes have your fast pacing, sometimes have your slow pacing, but a lot of them are subject to something like Magical Mystery Cure, where it is blowing through the scenes that are happening, and it's kind of hard to tell what's actually important, and we're not given a lot of time to really grasp what's happening, because we definitely see that in a lot of fan fictions, and a lot of them are short because of that. Gardez, Divebomb, maybe would you agree?
Not that I read a heck of a whole lot of stories. I've actually just gotten back into reading, but a lot of times I see people using what I just like to call monotone paces, where it's just going the same exact pace throughout the entire thing. You know, like the entire chapter of the story is just one speed of pacing, which, of course, like we've been talking about for the past half an hour, is something you really just don't want to do. It's kind of like, reading a story like that is kind of just like listening to me talk like this. There's no ups and downs in my voice. It's just monotone. It's just one thing I've been noticing lately in the limited amount of stories that I've read.
I'd say the closest thing to the problem with that episode that you see in fan fiction, it's actually one of the more common novice writer errors, and you'll see it all the time in the new stories section on FimFic. You know, there will be a story with this nice long description about how this adventure takes place, and you know, Twilight discovers some kind of magical friendship thing, and then you look at the story and it's 1,000 words and it's complete. And the description's practically half the story. That's a person who is trying to cram too much story into too small of a space because they're just not comfortable with the art of writing. You tell someone, hey, you have to write, a couple thousand words, and they just get all googly-eyed. And that's something that comes to practice.
All right, Perception Filter. I'm pretty sure you must have read several fics. So what do you have to comment on this?
Not much actually. Don't read as much as I should, but I do have a lot of first-hand experience with this. With my very first story that I wrote, it was about 4,000 words long, complete, and when I first published it on the site, I thought, man, this story's so awesome. I really got a lot of nice pacing, got all the details in there that needed to be there. I didn't over-explain anything. And then when my story got all these horrible ratings and horrible reviews and stuff, I had no idea what was going on. Because a lot of people on FanFiction, they don't really tell you what you did wrong. They just kind of dislike your story and walk away.
Same on YouTube.
Yeah, it happens everywhere.
There's people on the internet.
Yeah, that's the loveliness of the internet.
Yeah, but then I got one person who was kind enough to comment on my story and tell me what was wrong, and he just said, "You blew through the story." He barely said anything else about anything else, because he just said, "You put too much emphasis on cramming everything into this 4,000 words," and I hadn't thought out the story at all, and it was just a horrible Divebomb fic overall, but there was that one guy. He really helped me learn how to do pacing properly. Afterwards, I took a small break from my writing to actually learn how to do pacing, read some more stories, find out what to do, etc., etc.
So those are, I guess we've kind of seen a few examples of bad pacing. So let's look at examples of good pacing. And I guess we can refer to fictions or episodes. First episode that comes to mind, and I always compare this to Magical Mystery Cure, and I know it's one of the lesser favorite episodes, but the games ponies play. I think that episode has not a great plot, but it has far, far better pacing than several episodes in the show.
Which episode was that? I can't remember.
It's the one with the Equestrian Games Inspector.
Oh,
I remember it as the one with Rainbow's dad, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's the only reason people remember.
And the crazy chicken pony.
But,
Yeah.
so, Anwar, would you say that episode actually has good pacing compared to Magical Mystery Cure?
This is really hard to say, because I actually haven't paid too much attention to the pacing because the badness of this episode was so amazing. But it probably does. It is really hard to ignore a terrible plot when you have and look for something else in the story. So, but if you, for example, take the extreme other example like Magical Mystery Cure, it was overwhelming from its pacing, and now let me think of one that was too slow. Because one thing is for sure, it is with most aspects in a good story or episode or anything, when there are certain things you are not supposed to register. So it is a good sign when you cannot tell anything about them afterwards. Because if you have something like Magical Mystery Cure, every second one remembers the terrible fast pacing. If you have something completely boring, which isn't going nowhere, everybody remembers it for its boring pacing and being tempted to switch it off. And the same goes for stories. When you have a story with too slow or too quick pacing, you have a hard time reading it, you will put it aside, or you will remember the bad pacing. But in the moment, if it is good, you usually don't register it. It's opposite, like, for example, humor. When there is good humor, you will remember it. When there's non-humor, you will not remember it, but when you have bad humor, you will again remember it for being bad. But with pacing is one of the things, it's the best when you don't register it. So the fact that pacing never came to mind in regards to Games Ponies Play. Well, it may have been overshadowed by the terrible story, but it is a good sign when nobody is like, oh, it was so slow. Crystal Empire. Slow pacing. Each time when we saw this goddamn Crystal Fair, nothing happened.
Yeah, that's actually a good point.
Yes, and this is something people remember about this episode, because the pacing was so bad, people remember the pacing because it was bad. And
Made
when
me
you
forget about it, actually.
have about the whole episode, well,
About the whole episode except for Rainbow's Dead. That's all I cared about. All that mattered.
but at least you don't remember a bad pacing. So apparently, this part was not too bad.
Well,
No,
that's
it
the only
just made me
thing I could,
forget
that's the only
that
thing I could
happened.
go back and register after watching Magical Mystery Cure was, God, the last episode had better pacing than this.
I think that
but-
was basically supposed to be like 2 episodes or something, but maybe they didn't have the budget. And they just had to squeeze into 22 minutes.
Funny fact, Cloud Cuckoo Country just stated that because of the extreme high pacing and ironically even so much stuff happened, Magical Mystery Cure kind of felt like the shortest episode because of all the high speed.
Yeah, no kidding. That's something I can definitely agree with.
But yeah, this is pretty much a phenomenon with pacing actually, because if there is slow pacing, you either get bored, and when you get bored, you get the feeling that something takes longer. And yeah, the other way around. When something has a high speed pacing, you wonder where the hours went afterwards.
All right, now we have some good ideas of bad pacing in terms of fast pacing and even a bit of slow pacing. We need a good pacing episode, and I think the best example, in my opinion, was the Counterlot Wedding. Because I thought that progressed at a very nice type of pace. See, how I wish I could draw this, but how I figure a good pacing is when you have a story basically kind of slowly going up a hill, and maybe you have some dents in that hill where things are happening, and that kind of happens at Candlelight Wedding up to the reveal of Chrysalis, but we have some bumps in the road as we're climbing the hill, and then basically a sharp spike down when things happen. So that's when Chrysalis does her big reveal. Then I guess we have another very slow climb when we're about to lead up to the confrontation. And we basically have these kind of climbs and falls throughout the rest of the episode. And that's what makes it have really stellar pacing and makes it unpredictable, interesting, exciting. Would you guys say that's true?
I believe this is even the classic structure of a play, isn't it? With this five-step structure that you go up a bit, then you have a little bit a dive before it goes up to the climax, and on the way down you still got this retarding moment with a little up again for creating some tension on the way out of the story. So, yeah, this pretty much sounds exactly like the classical model.
And I think that's definitely why Candlelight Wedding had really good pacing to it. But this is when we're talking about show pacing. But when we talk about writing pacing, I think to make a successful story with good pacing, it's where they actually have to try and they do the slow pacing, they do the fast pacing, maybe they do a bit of medium pacing when intense moments are happening. So Gardez and Divebomb, I'm pretty sure you must have written some examples of going between these different variations of pacing, and you probably have something to say about that. Would that be true?
Sure, I'll go first. I'm actually going to steer this in a slightly different direction, so I don't have to talk about myself. If you're looking for an excellent example of a well-paced novel, and this is not to say anything about its other traits or whether it's a good story, but a novel that has excellent pacing is The Hunger Games. The way every single scene and every single paragraph is written does so to draw the reader on to the very next page. It uses what's known as motivation reaction units. It's a way of ordering and structuring your paragraphs so that each paragraph accomplishes a distinct goal, and the reader has to keep reading paragraphs. He can't stop until he gets to the end of a chapter. And then at that macro level, at the chapter level, it uses something called scenes and sequels to keep the reader wanting to know what happens in the very next chapter. It's a really technically superb way of writing. Now, whether you like The Hunger Games as a story, you think the characterization or plot or story is good, that's a completely different matter. But in terms of pacing, it's one of the best that I've ever read.
Divebomb, what do you have to say about that?
It really does kind of suck considering I haven't read anything in so friggin' long. It's been too long. I gotta start reading actual books.
Well, what can you tell us from writing experience?
Well, considering my only examples are here of like things that I've done, I guess I can just go over a few classic things for a good pacing. Sorry, having a. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yep.
Okay, I thought I was dying again. One thing to remember is there's a huge difference between scene and summary. Scene being, of course, like describing the events around the characters, whether it be just like an emotional scene, like or describing the scenery around them. And summary being like going over an expanse of time, such as like if like a year went by or a week or even like 10 minutes, like 10 minutes went by. You kind of for scene in a good slow pacing, like for example, if we're talking about like if we're slowing down for something emotional, you really want to again like want to avoid those redundancies and
basically you don't want to include information that is irrelevant to the plot as a whole or the characters even.
I lost you again.
And I can hear us? Oh.
We can hear him, at least.
Yeah, we can hear him. Alright, but I guess we'll try to keep this rolling. So, what did I just say?
Actually, if I can jump in, before he decided to go off on sabbatical, he said something pretty cool about not including information that is unessential, and I think we can actually use that to kind of step off into a different topic here. It's one that I saw come up in the chat, and that was the use of exposition. Most of us are taught when we're learning how to write that exposition's bad. It's a form of telling rather than showing.
Exposition dumps.
Yeah, but despite all that we're told, don't use exposition, for some reason every novice writer just feels that they just need to do that dump of exposition right at the beginning of the story because they think it's essential. They think that the reader needs to know the 3-chapter long backstory of their character before they get to anything actually going on, or otherwise the reader just won't care. Well, that's not true at all.
So they blow it all at once, is what you're saying?
Yeah, well, they blow it all at once, but they make the mistake of thinking that this information, which is relevant to the story, it's part of the story, certainly, but they make the mistake of thinking that it is necessary to the reader, when really it's not. And that's the challenge for the writer, is determining what information is necessary for the reader to know. And chances are it's probably less than you think it is.
Not to mention, it's kind of where you want to be placing this information. You don't want to be putting it in one spot. You want to be trying to pan it out throughout the story to help go with the pacing. My phone buzzed. Is that something you'd agree on, Gardez?
I would. Sorry, I was looking at the chat, just trying to catch up with it there really quick. Exposition, it's not always bad. You can certainly use it. I use flashbacks occasionally in my story to kind of fill in that information. But one of Kurt Vonnegut, he's a great writer, one of his rules was to start as close to the end of the story as possible. You don't want to start, way in the backstory. That's not necessary. You can cut all that out. The readers are smart people. You got to trust them a little bit. You got to trust that they're gonna take your story from based on what's actually going on rather than the backstory, and that they'll be interested. Comic book writers are terrible about this, actually. If you pick up any comic book, the first few pages usually are just all backstory. And it's terrible enough in comics, but at least the artwork's usually good enough to get you through that.
Gardez, you clearly must not have read The Walking Dead.
Oh, well, okay, there are exceptions. There's exceptions. Certainly very good comics out there. But especially a lot of the kind of Silver Age comics, they like the artist just feels that the readers are stupid and they need to have everything spoon-fed to them before you actually get to the story.
So this is where we want to kind of sort of segue back into pacing, and where you want to be having your information not bogged down the pacing to the point where it's too slow, too dull, and we stop caring because we're just getting information and we're not getting enough action. This is go ahead.
I would definitely agree with that, and this is the last thing I'll say before I shut up for a little bit. With fan fiction, especially, you have to start with some kind of action, pretty much. You know, there's people who are going to disagree with me in the chat, but I firmly think that you need to start with something going on. When you're writing a novel, that's not necessarily true, but novel writers have an advantage. The reader has already bought the book. They've invested money. They've got a financial incentive to keep reading, even if the first few chapters are just kind of slow and expository. But when you're writing fan fiction, there's no reader investment. You know, if I'm reading something and it doesn't interest me, I can click the back button and find something else that's more interesting. So when you're writing that fan fiction, you need to do something to instantly get your reader's attention and action. You know, it's maybe not the most sophisticated way of doing it, but it's a pretty surefire way of keeping them reading and hopefully getting them interested in your story.
Yeah,
So-
actually, good point. I remember picking up a story which I don't even remember what it was, but I picked up the story and it starts out with a character just walking somewhere, and there were subtle hints towards that he must have been some maybe god or something, because he was coming across a creature and he was remembering how he created it and something like this. But it was written so slow, and it never got me hooked, and I never continued reading the story, even so. Something about the premise must have made me interested in the first place, but I never went through, over the first 3 pages, because it was just like continuing his inner monologue and nothing happening, and he sit down on a bench and oh. So yeah, getting your readers hooked in the very beginning is important.
Yeah, that's definitely not an understatement. That's not overstated enough. Whatever word I'm trying to use there. But yeah, you definitely need to get your audience attracted right early on, because obviously fan fiction is a very murky area. A lot of people can easily get turned off by something. As Gardez said, because people, if they're not invested enough, they're just going to hit the back button. So I guess something that applies to that good pacing is you want to have that interesting hook at the start of the story, although you don't want to throttle them, as another tip I got. Once you get their attention, that's when you can definitely play with a bit of variety in your pacing. So, Perception, we haven't gotten your take on anything about this so far, so what do you have to say?
On what? The pacing or the exposition? Or the starting out fast?
All of the above.
Okay. I'll start with exposition first, since it seems the most obvious. It's a problem I've had for a long while. In a lot of my fics that I've written, I've always had the problem that I've always wanted to put everything at the start, because I've never really gotten past that. Because I found that the more I tried to spread out the information and put things in different areas so that, people would stay invested in the story, this kind of links up to, starting out really fast-paced. I never got around to that. I always thought that you had to put everything at the beginning. Like Gardez said, that's not something you want to do, because you can spread it out, and then people will still get it. And, yeah. Switching.
Also, if I may pause you for just a second, the spreading it out thing. That's a very good way to actually get readers wanting to read more. If you actually give them little to no information to go on first, and you give them incentive to want to learn more, like say you have a character with a murky backstory, and you mention what happens, but you don't give details, which is something I've done in my own story. So I was going somewhere with this. So would you definitely agree that's a good way to go about writing a story, is to give the reader something to want to look forward to want to learn about, and then give them that information as the story goes along?
Yeah. Recently, as I've started getting better at writing, I've started implementing that, and I've seen a steady incline in my reader. What's the number? Reader
Reader base.
Base. There we go. Thank you. In my reader base, and people have gotten more interested in my stories, etc. And but a problem with that is the spreading it out. You don't want to put too little in at the beginning, where they just have no idea what's going on whatsoever, because that would also disinterest them and make them want to leave.
Very true. Very true. I definitely made that mistake with a couple of my own. So, we got your take on the exposition. What do you have to say about the other stuff we were talking about?
I can't really remember what it was. Pacing? Yeah, mostly pacing. I don't really have much to say about that because you covered most of what can be said about pacing, but I do have some advice to give. I'm a very lazy writer. I don't like writing very often, even though I probably should. I like writing in short intervals, maybe 10 minutes, put in like 20 words at a time, and because I get bored of writing very easily, even though I like it. And I found that when you're bored and you're lazy and you don't like writing in long periods of time altogether, you tend to speed things up too much. As if you only put in 20 words at a time like I do, you make the story go too fast. I'm not really sure how to explain it, but it happens a lot with me. I have to go back and look over my story or the chapter when I finish it, and I have to add in all these little bits to spread things out more, so it's a medium pacing instead of just fast pacing all the time, even though it's in a slow scene.
Alright, I think one thing we should definitely cover is when and where to use the different kinds of pacing, or most importantly, I think transitioning. Obviously, there's a bit of finesse required when you're trying to go from writing a fast thing that happened to going back to a slow pace that happened, or to go into a slow pace and maybe start giving information. Not to mention people are not quite sure when information is necessary. So, I think what I have to say, in my personal opinion and experience when it comes to transitions, you want to be gradual with it, I think. You want to, like, if you're going from slow pacing to a fast pacing scene, unless you're trying to do a shock and awe moment, which is always what can excite the reader sometimes. You want to make it kind of go quickly from a slow pace to a bit of a medium pace and then right into a fast pace and something like that, like The Hill. Would you guys agree with that? Or do you have some other way to do transitions from scene to scene?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just confess to being kind of amateurish on pacing. It's definitely one of the things I need to work on in my own writing. Typically, transitions they're not planned; they just happen based on what I think the story needs, and the arc of the story is what drives the pacing of any given chapter. So you might see chapters or scenes that are fast, followed by slow, and eventually I'll figure out, okay, hey, I should probably mix this up and try to break it up. Oddly, my comedies are probably better with pacing than anything else, just because with comedies you're always trying to build a certain degree of tension. They say timing is everything in comedy, and just having to keep that in your mind really makes it easier to pace a story.
Mm.
Yep.
Oh, sorry. I had to yawn.
It's alright.
Yeah, I really agree with Gardez on this one.
Alright. A and Y, let's tap into your expertise again, and I guess we're going to bring up Magical Mystery Cure again. Yeah, because we love picking on that episode. But would it be safe to say that episode did not have very good transitions? This is why I said the brake logic with the car.
Mm-hmm.
So, what would you say about the transitions during Magical Mystery Cure?
Have there been actually any real transitions? I believe the only one, at least in the first part, is really just from the one scene to the next one. I believe the flashback when Twilight remembered what happening the last night, it was like she talked to Spike, and then there was, while she voiced over it, some kind of fate, but not really a lot leading into the flashback. And then, yeah, it is pretty much going from one point to the next, especially when you consider between the phase when Twilight was depressed. And it was really just, he was depressed in one moment, then Spike touches her on the shoulder, is like, you will find a way. And she's just like, oh yeah, I will find a way. And whoa, there was the one scene was depressed, the next scene was really upbeat, and yeah, it just happened from one moment to the next. And only in the last part they kind of took their time with, I'm not sure how they opened the coronation scene, but if there was some kind of going there, but at least the revisit, whatever, when they start the opening song again, then they start again like the episode. So they have this transition with coming from the sky, zooming in through the clouds, but except this, it was really just one scene after the next.
So it didn't really, the transitions just weren't smooth. They were kind of janky and jarry.
Yeah.
Alright, so, now I guess we got a firm grasp on transitions, and I guess we're kind of all agreed that you want to make them gradual unless you have some sort of shock moment happening. Like, suddenly character dies, right? Ensue action scene, yada yada. That's kind of how you generally want to handle your transitions?
Generally, for the most part. I like, I want to bring something up right here. If any of you have read Game of Thrones, not just watched the show, what was it? Martin? Yeah, Martin. He does a very good job of doing the scene transitions in between chapters, because he does it per character, and each character is so far away that when he does the scene break, you always want to know what's happening to them afterwards.
That's actually a very, very good point to bring up. Keep going.
And he never puts one character and then the same character right after. He always puts some characters in between to make you see what's going on elsewhere, but also you don't know what's happening to that one character, and you really want to know. And that, coming back to the keeping the reader invested, it does keep the reader invested, even if you've bought the book. It makes sure that you are staying and reading the whole thing.
Although I think that's more of a narrative and a style choice rather than anything having to do with pacing, per se. But that is a very good point. That's probably a good bit of something to bring up with the audience here. But I think one more thing I can really talk about while we're beating this dead horse is genres. Because, God, every genre works a very different way with your pacing.
Yes.
And they're even harder to get done right. Like, horror is a completely different thing than comedy. I'm pretty sure Gardez here can agree with.
Yes, I would.
And, too bad Divebomb's not here anymore, but he'd probably talk about the difference between doing, basically adventure and romance, and those things are kind of hard to weave in at times with the pacing. You know, try not to slow things down too much with kissy kissy goo goo nonsense and not moving the plot along any further. Although Gardez does ride that line pretty well at points. That's beside the point. So, Gardez, you say you've done a dark story and comedy.
Yes.
What can you kind of tell us about, I suppose, rules when it comes to how to do certain types of pacing with different genres? Like, what's your recommended advice for what types of pacing you want to be using and how you want to use them?
Okay, well that's like a master's level class, trying to condense it into a short answer here. I'll see what I can do here. One of the good examples I want to use, though, since we're on the topic of genre, it's not one that you see often in fan fiction, but it's suspense, suspense/horror. And the particular fiction is 413 Mulberry Lane, a report. It was on Equestria Daily some time back, and it's essentially a crossover with House of Leaves, if anyone has read that. And the whole thing is very slow-paced. There's no, except for a very short burst at the end, there's no real fast-paced stuff going on in this. But it's one of the most suspenseful stories I've ever read on FanFiction. It's far more suspenseful than something like Cupcakes, which is really just a gore fest. I mean, you're not really surprised by anything that happens in Cupcakes. You know how that's going to end as soon as you read the first page. But with 413 Mulberry Lane, the pacing is very slow, but it's just so well written that it keeps you going because you know something terrible is going on, but you don't know what, and it's not till the end that you figure out the what. Another genre that doesn't get too much credit in fiction just because it's very hard to write, at least in fan fiction, is mystery. And I'm going to use another one of my favorites here if I can pull it up real quick. It's Letters from a Friend at the End of the World. I'm going to just give you the summary real quick. Basically, it's one of those Trixie Twilight stories. One day, Twilight, she's in her library doing her thing, and a letter shows up out of the blue from Trixie. And it's clearly the latest letter in a long series of letters that Trixie has been writing. It's talking about Trixie's adventures and how she's she's slowly proving something to Twilight. The problem is it's the first one that Twilight's ever received. This is like the 15th or so letter. None of the others have actually gotten to her. And it sets up this instant bit of suspense. What happened to the other letters? What's been going on with Trixie? Why has she changed so much? What the heck is she doing out there? Now, this particular story, I'm sad to say, kind of blows it because, it sets up all these awesome questions in Chapter 1. Then in Chapter 2, it answers all of them. And you're like, well, okay, that solves the mystery, I guess. And then there's, 50,000 more words of a only slightly related adventure story. So that was obviously an example of poor pacing. If it had just not answered that question right away, if it had strung out the mystery and had us, made us keep wondering what was in the rest of those letters, why they didn't get to Twilight, what was going on, it would have been a much more fun read.
Yeah, I guess that's a very good idea about suspenseful stories, Ian. This is kind of why I brought The Dark Knight up earlier with the medium pacing, because that particular movie, it had kind of something hanging over it the whole time. You just weren't sure when it was going to come down and how bad it was going to be. And that's kind of made it really fun, unpredictable, and made you kind of sitting on the edge of your seat while you're just waiting for the thing to happen that you're not sure what's going to even happen. But one of the main things I think we're going between is like comedy and I suppose something serious or really dark or gory or something like that. But you have to kind of go with different tactics for each of these. Like with what would you say how to write a good suspense story so that way you're not making it predictable when the thing is going to happen? What kind of advice would you have for that?
Well, suspense is one of the harder genres to write. People too often kind of shade straight into horror. They just start tossing blood everywhere and body parts, and it's not really suspenseful at that point. Now that's a
slasher.
Yeah, now it's just a gore fest. You've lost the suspense. Suspense novels are best when you slowly introduce more and more facts to the reader, but you're always keeping the one central fact secret. There's something that you're not telling them, and they have to try to piece it together for themselves. And it's pretty clear based on what they can see that it's pretty bad. Here's a good example. You're in a dark room. It's pitch black. You can't see what's going on. So you're feeling around with your hands, or hooves in these cases. And you get to the center of the room and you feel something really big. But you're kind of feeling at it with your hands, and you feel it's got a rough texture. You don't know what it is. You start working your way around it. You're touching it with your hands. You're feeling this rough texture. It's kind of warm. It's much warmer than the darkness around you. And then you feel something hard and smooth. It's not this rough kind of semi-pliable texture that you were feeling before. Now it's this really hard, solid thing. And then you feel something wet, something really hot and wet. It feels like you just stuck your hand in something's mouth. And at this point, it's pretty obvious that you probably shouldn't be touching this thing, whatever it is. But you still don't know what it is. And it's not until the very end when the lights come on or there's some kind of reveal that you realize, oh, you've been touching, whatever it was, hideous monster,
Dragon.
baby hippo, doesn't matter. That's the point of the story. But you keep giving the reader those little facts, and it's not until the end of the suspense that they're finally revealed.
Alright, that's what makes a good suspense, but, see, another good thing is, like, setting up scares or setting up a laugh, like a joke. Those are something that's definitely a lot harder to pull off, because, yeah, you have to get the reader to drop their guard with, like, I'm not sure where on the scale you want to be doing this. I think it's in the slow pacing section is when you want to be applying the scare, like the shock thing. I want to bring in a good example from a film I saw. It's Paranormal Activity 2. I don't know if any of you guys have seen it, but one thing I really loved from that particular film that definitely scared the crap out of me was there's a scene where this character is just kind of sitting in the kitchen, nothing happening after like an argument or some kind of conversation just happened, and there's just this weird noise going on, but it doesn't seem serious. You just kind of dismiss it as maybe not anything really much. And just out of nowhere, boom, all the cupboards and the refrigerator and everything in the kitchen just flies open. It's daytime when you least expect the scares, because everyone knows they come at night and things like that. And that's, I think, what definitely scared me in particular, that daylight scene, because I was caught in such an off-guard state. So, what do you think needs to be done to get people in that off-guard state in order to make those kinds of shocks and awes work? Anybody?
I'm gonna jump in here. A way to put people in the off-guard state, if you're writing a horror fic or a shock fic or even a suspense fic, depending on how you're writing it. Like you said, one of the obvious ones is daytime versus nighttime, because humans have a natural fear of the dark, and so you don't expect anything like just to come out of nowhere during the day, because that's when you're off guard because you don't expect anything. Because most of the time people put things in the dark where people are naturally afraid of them because you can't see them. You don't know what they are. But yeah, that's mainly what it comes down to. If you can't see it and you don't know what it is, it adds more of a suspense factor, and that puts people on guard if they can't see it. But then again, you don't want to just show people whatever it is. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a monster. I don't know, some sort of monster. You don't want to just tell people it's there, because then they won't be off guard, but they're going to know it's there.
You want to make them maybe think it's there, or something like that? Well, I guess in some cases you want to make them think it's there, but you're just not sure when the spooky monster is going to come out of the cupboard.
Yeah, it's hard to do. It depends on what atmosphere you're creating. You want to do it at the time that people least expect it. If you're doing it in a dark atmosphere, you want to do it in a lighted section of, I don't know, maybe a dark hallway that has a few lights, and you can actually see what's going on, and then people won't expect anything to happen there. If you're doing it in some completely other environment, maybe, I don't know, you just have to pretty much do what I found is the opposite of the environment of whatever is generally going on. So you have a long dark hallway, a few small lighted sections that something would happen. I can't really think of anything else versus light and dark. I just can't think of anything. But I'm pretty sure you get what I'm saying. You want to do the opposite of what people are expecting.
Gardez,
and I'm just rambling here.
Hey, that's what we do here at Standard Operating Procedure.
Yeah, but it is pretty much a solid point you make after all. This is how what works for shock as well as for humor, because breaking with expectations is usually what makes people laugh in the first place. And yeah, then second to the breaking aspect comes the timing aspect, and then you got a joke ready to go. Yay!
Sure
yeah, with comedy, one of the important things to remember is that you can never stop with comedy. Especially, you'll have a character say something funny, and a lot of writers, especially if they're new to the genre, will just kind of like, okay, that's it, now on to the next bit. With comedy, you always want to try to top it. So, okay, absurd situation happens, Character says something hilarious, and then there needs to be something else on top of that. And you see this in television writing a lot, because television writers are some of the best comedy writers. They have to do it day in, day out. They get a lot of practice. But you're always looking to top yourself in comedy. You have to keep the joke going. You don't want to crash into the ground, but you want to keep it going as long as you can.
It's definitely kind of keep the pacing, just sort of keep climbing up the hill, so to speak, with comedy, I guess.
Yeah, you want to try to keep making. I'm going to use one of my own as an example, just because it's the one I'm most familiar with. Naked Singularity. Twilight's reading this erotic romance that she wrote, that she mistakenly thinks is great literature, to a literature recital, and she has no idea how terrible it is. But she can't see the audience reaction, so she keeps reading this thing, and she keeps just digging herself deeper and deeper and deeper with these horrible metaphors, terrible writing, and it's intercut with different scenes, different ponies trying to stop her, and then it cuts back to her, digging herself even deeper, and you just have to keep building. You have to keep building with comedy. That's, I guess, the best way to describe it. You can never really stop until you get to the climax.
Indeed, and that's why you want to have kind of those big bumps in the road with all the bad things happening up to the really bad thing happening at the climax. In just about anything, really. Alright, I think we might have definitely covered quite a bit of the whole pacing in general. We've discussed some good pacing, we've discussed some bad pacing. I think we've said enough about how to really actually write it, I suppose. I'm trying to improvise here because, I'm a poor planner. That's just how I work on SD3.
Ba-da-boom.
But yeah, I think that pretty much covers the main gist of it. So, do you guys have any other bits of advice you want to add regarding how to write good pacing, how to handle pacing in general, what makes good pacing, what makes bad pacing? Is there anything else you guys feel like saying about that?
I guess the basic thing is be aware of what you want to achieve while writing a certain part of your story, and be aware of which kind of pacing can do. You can use slow as well as quick pacing for different aspects, as we kind of went into during the show. You can use quick one for creating hectic. You can use quick one for getting to the point, stuff like this. But being aware of what pacing can invoke in the reader, and that's basically it. You always have to keep the reader in mind while writing. And yeah, this is basically, be aware, use your pacing consciously. Don't just write for the heck of writing and ignore pacing as a whole. Just know what you're think about why you use certain speed, tempo, whatever.
I'll just say that pacing is one of those kind of it's a skill that you don't need it to be able to write a story, but it's one of those kind of capstone skills that really makes the difference between a highly polished story and one that you kind of look at and you're like, oh, okay, it was a decent story, but just felt like something was missing. It really helps separate the top fix from the really best of the fix, if you can do it right.
Perception?
I don't got much more to add.
Do you have just any other kind of advice you'd like to give?
Advice overall? Like I said, I'm a very lazy writer. I don't like to write in long intervals at a time. And I'm coming back to this again because I think it's a big problem with me. If you do write in small bits, make sure you're not speeding up the story too much. You're not just letting it get out of hand. But other than that, there's not much more I can say.
Alright, and I guess if I had my 2 bits, basically what I'd say to all you writers out there is when you want to write pacing, you definitely want to have those fast bits, you want to have those slow bits, and you don't want to blow everything all at once, you don't want to start slow. You want to have that fast bit to get the readers interested, then just kind of have your story just kind of going up and down slopes. But to make it unpredictable, try to put your fast-paced moments in unpredictable areas or places that haven't been kind of done before. If you watch any other Michael Bay action movie, like Transformers or anything large-scale like that, they always stick to the exact same formula throughout their whole story, and that's what makes them so predictable, because they almost play out the exact same way in terms of pacing. But if you can do your pacing at different timings, that's one way to get your readers interested. And I guess just to write it, and honestly, this is probably the biggest advice I can give, because it is easily kind of mishandled, because a lot of people write in fast pace and write with too little info, or they write in slow pace with too much info that is not important to the story. You have to figure out from the get-go what is important, okay? Is the confrontation itself important? Because you can actually skip whole action scenes if the action themselves is not important. They just be fluff. You can actually you can cut details you don't need. Basically that's all you want to focus on. What is important in your story? Is that statue over there in the corner of the room important? Is the details of the town that they're in very important during a fast-paced section? Or when you're in a slow-paced section and you're letting us get to know the world a little more, what pieces of information do we need to know to progress the story? That's the very first and foremost thing you have to figure out when you are, in my opinion, when you're actually writing your story and figuring out your pacing, is knowing what is important. So, guys, do you have anything else you feel like saying before we kind of put this to an end?
I have one thing. 12 and a half.
12 and a half. Words
Yep.
of wisdom.
Words to live by.
Gardez and why do you have anything else super important to say about pacing that you'd like to add?
Nothing super important. Just like to thank you for inviting me back.
I'm always glad to have you back, Gardez. You're tons of fun, and your professionalism adds the professionalism this show desperately needs half the time. I'm glad to have that.
And you're still letting me rejoin.
Because we need to have some good like positives and negatives to go in this to create some conflict, you know. But NY, do you have anything you'd like to mention on pacing?
No, I believe my rambling earlier about knowing what to do is, my basic 2 bits.
Oh yeah. Last thing, I promise, and this is going to go back to Magical Mystery Cure, is if you have important things that are happening, don't blow it all in a short bit. Like Twilight going through her whole little conflict arc with the cutie marks being all switched around. You don't want to blow that so soon. Pace it out so people can absorb it, and make your fast moments and your slow moments to make this moment interesting, and let us get to absorb what happened, and make it feel impactful on the viewer. And that's another reason why you definitely want to sometimes stretch out your pacing so you're not having it just blow from scene to scene. So yeah, just if the author just doesn't have anything to work, or readers doesn't have anything to work on, God, I'm stuttering a lot today. If the author can't grasp what's happening, and they just don't have a lot to work with, and they don't have time to absorb it and let it impact them, then you're doing something wrong. Plain and simple. Okay. That is everything. I don't want to beat this dead horse anymore. Aha.
Pardon the pun.
Pardon the pun. I think we definitely covered a lot about pacing. We didn't get any questions on our live stream here. This was heavily improvised, and I feel ashamed for that. And I don't even have my 3 random questions for things we like to ask our panelists. So here's what we'll do just for lulz. Gardez, perception, filter, and why. If you have a completely random pony-related question, or just something that has to do with the show, or bronies, or something like that, ask that out in the open.
What exactly happened in the last episode? I never saw it.
I was gonna say, who's your favorite Wonderbolt? Is a good example of just random nonsense to ask.
But you don't have to answer. I mean, I can always watch the episode. I probably should, but it's just... I'm so lazy.
Well, let me give you the 10-word summary. Twilight Sparkle becomes an alicorn. The end.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was obvious. I got that from how many people, being so angry about it. Oh my god, Twilight's an alicorn. Oh, it's the end of the world. Drama.
I mean, you pretty much know this particular fact 2 months before, or a few weeks at least, 3 weeks before the episode even came out, which was really annoying.
Yeah.
Because, I try to imagine how an amazing twist it would have been if you watched this episode, if you have been able to watch this episode and did not know this would happen. Because because everybody knew about it, because nobody could shut the fuck up about this topic. It was like, you were sitting there through the whole episode and were like, no, okay. Oh, okay, now she is kind of vaporized. I wonder if this might lead in any way to her turning into an alicorn. And what a twist, it did. I mean, could you guys imagine how amazing this would have been if you haven't known this, and then she comes down, and when she spreads her wings for the first time, you actually would be like, holy crap, what just happened? But no. Did I mention that I don't like spoilers?
Yeah, them spoilers, they're not fun.
Oh, speaking of spoilers, Snape kills Dumbledore.
Oh, Darth Vader is Luke's father.
Okay.
Bruce Willis was dead the whole time.
I start closing down the show here because people got things to do. I got things to do. I got a house to clean up because there's a party going on tomorrow.
You got stuff to do.
I got.
Look at you being all busy.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I don't have any of my usual fun questions I like to ask our panelists because I rushed this script together really, really, really quick, and there's some bad time management for you, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so let's figure out how to wrap this up. AMY, Perception, Gardez, and Divebomb, even though he's not here, thank you so much for joining the show. You guys have been a hoot.
No problem.
This was the last effing time I came to such a stupid occasion.
But yeah, every time again soon, whenever you need me. Just say a word.
Thank you.
Just say one.
Okie dokie. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was our first workshop episode of the Stableside Discussions, Disputes, and Debates. Next episode, we are going to keyword try, to see if we can get some other very interesting guests on the show to talk about OCs. Because, that's
What are you talking about? I'm here. I'm interesting.
What are you doing? We talked about OCs last week on the Crepuscular Bronies. You're just copying us now.
We're going to talk about writing tips on how to write good OCs.
Okay, we didn't talk about this.
But that's probably going to be next week's episode. If you guys like this workshop, you thought it was helpful, and maybe you want to see some ideas to help it improve, please let us know on our YouTube channel where this will be uploaded. I will also include links for all of the guests that have joined us today. What else am I missing? Oh, yeah.
Are you okay?
No.
Breathe.
This is what happens when I
Breathe.
down. Okay. But next episode, we are going to try doing another workshop. And next episode, we are going to keyword try, to get Penstroke on the show, who is the author of Past Sins.
Nice.
We're going to see if we can get him on here.
Okay, I gotta read that story then.
Or listen to it. There is a fabulous, actually 1.5 very nice dramatic readings on YouTube. One by the great and powerful Vudis Venyos, but he only finished half the story. He came until chapter 13 out of 21 of the original version. and there is a complete one by, oh God, I forgot his name, another guy who actually completed the whole reading of the revised version. So there's the easy way to go.
Alright, but that is the plan for next week, and that has been this episode of Stableside Discussions, Disputes, and Debates, clocked in at 1.5 hours, because I always have to keep checking this.
Woohoo!
A lot longer than I planned. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you found it helpful to all your writers out there, and if, like I said, if you have any ideas to help improve it, you can feel free to comment on our YouTube channel, which is below in the live stream. And, yeah, that about sums it up. Thank you for joining us, guys, and you all have a good day.
Bye-bye!
All right, later, everyone. Don't
Bye-bye.
die.